The hall of the Galactic Senate was unusually loud that morning, filled with layered voices in dozens of alien languages, each one tinged with tension. Lights pulsed overhead, illuminating the grand dome where history had been both made and destroyed across centuries. Delegates from every known system had gathered for what was supposed to be a formal review of the ceasefire along the contested quadrant between the Terran Alliance and the Zorkai Empire. But instead of peace, the meeting veered rapidly toward confrontation. At the center of the chamber stood Warlord Zarnak of the Zorkai, a towering figure cloaked in black and crimson armor, with 4 muscular arms folded across his chest. His long plaited tail swayed behind him like a serpent, and his skin shimmered with reptilian scales that had once deflected plasma fire. His kind thrived on war and lived by ancient traditions of blood and honor. He despised the humans, not because they were a threat, but because they were unpredictable, and lately, far too successful. The Earth delegation sat to the side, far more reserved in posture, but not in presence. Commander Soren, the head of the human diplomatic team, tried to mask his frustration behind a glassy expression, but anyone who knew him could see the twitch in his jaw. The recent human victories in Scar Sector had humiliated the Zorkai, especially because the humans had done it with fewer numbers and minimal losses. But nothing had enraged the Warlord more than the fact that these so-called soft-worlders had achieved such results without shedding excessive blood. It wasn't just defeat, it was dishonor. Zarnak's voice boomed across the chamber, shaking the metalwork and stirring murmurs among the other delegates. "We grow tired of words, Terran. Your species hides behind cleverness and calculated cowardice. You win battles without glory, without blood. This Senate is a place of liars and masks. I challenge your kind to a duel, an ancient rite, combat between warriors, no machines, no armies, no tricks." There was a moment of silence. Commander Soren opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a diplomatic counter or suggest a delay. But before he could say a word, Zarnak lifted a heavy gauntlet and pointed it squarely at the youngest human seated beside the delegation table. Her name was Elise Wren. Barely 22, she was a junior cadet from Earth's Interspecies Diplomatic Corps, sent to observe and document the proceedings. She had remained silent the entire session, her gaze calm, almost detached, as though none of this concerned her. Her uniform bore no insignia beyond the minimalist Terran patch and her ID marker. No rank, no medals, just her. "I challenge her," Zarnak growled. Gasps echoed. Some delegates leaned forward, others recoiled. Commander Soren stood up, visibly stunned. "She is not qualified for combat. She is not even in military command." Zarnak bared his teeth. "You say your kind are equals to us. Let her prove it." The Senate High Chancellor, a transparent being of crystalline structure known as Valari Prime, tried to interject. "This is irregular. The young human is not registered for sanctioned duels under intergalactic charter." "I am," Elise said, quietly but clearly. All heads turned. Her voice was soft but unwavering, like a stone dropping into a still lake. She rose from her seat without looking at anyone. Commander Soren's voice dropped to a whisper. "Elise, you don't have to do this." She looked at him. "He picked me. If we decline, he'll say we fear him. If we choose someone else, he'll say we play games. I'm not a soldier, but I am human. That's all he asked for." The room fell into a hush. The High Chancellor turned toward her. "Do you consent, Cadet Wren?" "I do," she replied. There was a low growl of satisfaction from Zarnak. His tail struck the floor once in approval. At dawn, in the arena of balance, blades only, no armor, let the stars witness the truth. The Senate quickly recessed, unable to contain the ripple effect of what had just happened. Already, the news had spread. Delegates whispered that the Zorkai had cornered the humans, that the girl would not survive, that this was more than a duel. It was a ritual execution dressed as sport. Elise walked calmly through the metallic corridor behind the chamber, her steps steady. Behind her, Commander Soren followed in silence, frustration radiating off him. Once they were alone in the human quarters, he finally spoke. "You shouldn't have accepted that challenge. He'll kill you. You saw the armor, the training. You're not even enhanced." "I know," she said. "Then why?" She looked up at him, eyes colder than before. "Because he thinks I'm weak, and so does everyone else." Commander Soren ran a hand over his face. "You're not weak. You're untested. That's not the same. There's no shame in deferring to someone trained." She opened a small personal locker and removed a long, thin case. Inside was a single, polished combat blade, standard issue, human origin, unadorned. She gripped it without ceremony. "Do you remember what I was doing before this program?" she asked. Soren didn't answer. "I wasn't in university. I wasn't in cadet school. I was in the underlayers of Gaia 9, Sector 4. No law, no aid. Just concrete, rust, and people trying to survive with knives and fists." He stared at her. "I didn't learn combat in a classroom. I learned it by staying alive." She turned and looked him in the eye. "Zarnak wants a blood duel? He's getting one." A silence fell between them. Soren didn't try to stop her again. Something in her voice had changed. Gone was the observant junior cadet who watched debates from the side. In her place stood someone sharper, like her blade, refined in shadows rather than systems. She wrapped the blade hilt in worn cloth, securing it to her hip. With a final glance toward the outer chamber, she walked past him and disappeared into the preparation wing, her back straight and pace unhurried. Somewhere deep in the Zorkai warship above the Senate platform, Zarnak was preparing too, but with smug satisfaction, not urgency. To him, this duel was a mere show, a way to crush human pride before witnesses, a ritual that would restore his people's confidence in superiority. He had no idea that the young woman he had just challenged was not a symbol of diplomacy or fragility. She was something far older, something bred in darkness, in desperation, and in silence, and she had no intention of losing. Elise stepped into the designated quarters assigned to the human delegation, a modest but clean section of the central station orbiting Varel Prime. The automatic door hissed shut behind her as the silence of the room pressed in. She set her blade case down on the metal surface of the work table and allowed herself a breath, not of fear or regret, but of stillness. She needed to focus. The room's lights dimmed automatically, adjusting to her biometric data. The illumination softened to a warm hue, as if recognizing the tension humming under her skin. She sat at the edge of the cot, untied her boots, and slipped them off with a slow deliberation. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, but beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts moved quickly, calculating, recalling. Every strike, every angle, every instinct honed over the years that had no place in clean government reports. Elise unzipped her standard-issue jacket and set it aside. She stripped to the base layer and stepped into the compact hygiene pod. Warm water sprayed across her shoulders, and for a moment, she let the steam envelop her. She braced her hands against the wall and lowered her head, allowing herself to feel the heat seep into her muscles. The coming duel wasn't just a physical battle. It was a performance. Every move would be watched, recorded, dissected. This wasn't about winning. It was about how she would win. She exited the pod, dried off quickly, and moved toward the small equipment locker. Inside were various combat uniforms, but she bypassed the armored suits and synthetics. Instead, she chose the thinnest, most flexible fabric, matte black, high-collared, reinforced only at the joints. No protective plates, no visors. She wasn't expecting to block hits. She was planning to avoid them entirely. She reached into a side pouch and withdrew a bundle of cloth. Carefully, she unwrapped it, revealing an old, frayed wristband, a piece of survival gear from her time in Gaia 9. The metal tag sewn into the fabric bore the symbol of the underground sector she had grown up in. To anyone else, it looked like scrap. To her, it was a reminder of who she really was beneath the title of cadet. She slipped it onto her wrist and pulled the sleeve down over it. As she prepared her gear, the door chimed. She paused. Enter. The door slid open to reveal Lieutenant Rourke, a human officer in his early 40s, his face stern and weathered. He had been quiet during the Senate session, but Elise knew from earlier missions that he had seen real combat, not the simulations most of the younger diplomats had grown accustomed to. He stepped in and offered a curt nod. "I figured you wouldn't sleep," he said. "I never do before fights," she replied. He reached into a satchel and pulled out a data slate. "I brought what intel we have on Zorkai duel technique. You probably already know most of it, but it's worth reviewing." She accepted the slate and scanned the holographic projection. The display showed Warlord Zarnak's past combat records, over 30 ritual duels, each ending in quick, brutal dominance. He favored an overhead strike to open, often using his upper right arm for reach, while following with a sweeping tail strike from the left side. His style was based on raw force and psychological pressure. He overwhelmed his opponents in the first 10 seconds. "He assumes he'll break you early," Rourke said. "If you survive the first 30 seconds, he'll get angry, sloppy." "I won't give him that long," she said, locking the slate. Rourke folded his arms. "You shouldn't even be in this situation. We could have blocked it diplomatically. Number you would have tried, and he would have claimed cowardice, doubled his forces, and paraded his dominance across every neutral system. We would have lost the war without a shot fired." He sighed. "You know that if something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm not going to die on a stage. I'm going to end this before anyone understands what happened." Rourke regarded her in silence for a moment, then stepped forward and held out a small vial. It shimmered faintly with a pale blue liquid. "What's that?" she asked. "Neural shock stabilizer. For after, just in case." She took it and nodded. "Thanks." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Elise, you're better than most of the soldiers I've trained. Don't let them define what you are." She looked at him. "I stopped caring what people called me a long time ago." When he left, she resumed her preparations. She secured her boots, checked the straps of her uniform, and ran through a quick series of stretches. Each movement was fluid and deliberate. Her body remembered the rhythms of street combat, where hesitation meant death and cleverness was a survival skill, not a tactic. The hours passed quickly. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. Her focus was total. When the station's internal lights dimmed and the announcement tone echoed through the quarters, arena protocols initiated, she was already walking toward the elevator platform, blade in hand. As she stepped inside, the lift sealed and began to descend toward the lower deck. The arena was located beneath the Senate Tower, a vast chamber carved into the moon's bedrock and reinforced with gravitational dampeners and containment fields. It had been built centuries ago for ceremonial combat between war-born species. It hadn't seen a human duel in over 50 years. The elevator stopped with a soft chime. The doors opened into a wide corridor where 2 attendants waited, one from the Neutral Observers Committee and the other a Zorkai combat marshal. The latter eyed her with open skepticism, but said nothing. Elise nodded to the observers, submitted her blade for inspection, and underwent a standard scan for chemical or cybernetic enhancements. "Unmodified," the marshal said aloud, as if disappointed. The observer marked the confirmation and handed her blade back. "You may proceed." She stepped through the final arch and entered the staging area behind the main gate. The air was thick with anticipation. On the far end, through the translucent arena shield, she could see Zarnak pacing inside the dueling ring, surrounded by his retainers. His armor was minimal by Zorkai standards, only a spine guard and gauntlets, but his claws were freshly sharpened and his exposed arms flexed with impatient hunger. An announcement echoed through the chamber in 3 languages: Zorkai, Terran Standard, and High Galactic. Combatants will enter the ring, weapons only, no armor, no external support. Duel continues until surrender, incapacitation, or death. Elise tightened the grip on her blade and stepped through the gate as it opened. The roar of the crowd was distant through the shield, but the heat of the arena lights hit her skin immediately. She squinted against the brightness, but didn't stop walking. She and Zarnak stopped exactly 10 meters apart, the traditional opening distance. The marshal raised a staff between them. "Initiate on signal," he said. She took one deep breath, exhaled slowly, and bent her knees slightly, ready, alert, coiled like a spring. Across from her, Zarnak tilted his head, sneering. "You should have run when you had the chance." She didn't answer. She didn't blink. The staff dropped. The duel began. The air between them shifted the moment the marshal's staff struck the arena floor. The resonant clang echoed through the vast chamber and was immediately replaced by silence so thick it felt alive. The duel had begun. Zarnak did not hesitate. His instincts, honed over decades of ceremonial slaughter, exploded into motion. He lunged forward with terrifying speed for a creature his size, closing half the distance in a single stride. His upper right arm swung downward in a vicious arc. The curved bone blade fused into his gauntlet, shimmering with bioluminescent toxins. The lower left arm swept horizontally, perfectly timed to catch an evading opponent. His tail snapped like a whip, arcing high behind him, ready to strike the moment she shifted her balance. Elise moved before he finished his step. Her feet pivoted precisely on the dusty arena floor. She ducked just under the vertical blade, felt the breath of it graze her hair, and twisted sideways to slip past the sweeping lower strike. Zarnak's tail cracked through the air, but by then she was no longer there. She was behind him. The audience, mostly composed of Zorkai officers and dignitaries, gave a collective snarl of confusion. Elise didn't attack. Not yet. She watched his shoulders rotate, all four arms resetting for another sequence. His movements were rehearsed, brutal, and expected. That was his mistake. He turned, fangs bared. "You run like prey." She didn't answer. He charged again. This time, the pattern changed. He opened with a feint from his lower right arm, followed by an upward slash meant to draw her into ducking. She didn't fall for it. Instead, she sidestepped with a sharp snap of her right leg, slid low, and slashed upward with her blade, carving across the plating of his lower abdomen, not deep enough to incapacitate, but sharp enough to bleed. The purple spray struck the sand with a sizzle. The crowd went silent. Zarnak recoiled with a grunt. Pain wasn't foreign to him, but the speed of her retaliation was. She had moved like a shadow, silent, fast, and without hesitation. Her footwork was precise, her balance flawless. She gave no tells, no wasted motion. She had studied him, and now she was unraveling him, piece by piece. He growled and circled her, slower now, tail swaying with measured aggression. "You bleed me, girl, but I have 30 victories. You have none." "You had 30 opponents who weren't me," she replied, steady. His lip curled. He feigned a lunge, testing her. She didn't flinch. He tried again, this time darting forward with an uppercut. She dropped low, rolled beneath the strike, and cut a deep gash behind his left knee as she passed. He howled. Her blade gleamed under the arena lights, streaked now with Zorkai blood. The heat from the crowd began to shift. What had started as laughter and taunts now turned into murmurs, uncertain glances, and unsettled silence. Zarnak backed away for the first time. Elise didn't pursue. She remained calm, centered, her eyes on his torso, reading the tension in his frame. She had fought larger opponents before, back in Gaia 9, where size often meant hunger and desperation. She knew the key was to let them burn themselves out. Anger led to missteps. Missteps led to mistakes. And mistakes, she knew, could be fatal. He spat to the side and roared, his voice amplified through the arena's curved walls. "You're not even enhanced. "What are you?" "I'm what you underestimated," she said. That struck deeper than any blade. With a deafening cry, Zarnak threw himself forward, abandoning defense. He led with all four arms, alternating blade strikes in a spinning rhythm, his tail whirling like a scythe. It was a storm of motion, overwhelming and chaotic. Elise moved with it. She didn't counter every strike. She avoided them. She flowed between the blades, each motion deliberate, economic, almost elegant. Sparks flew as his bone weapon scraped the arena wall behind her. A tail strike nearly caught her shoulder, but she ducked and let the momentum carry her into a slide beneath his massive chest. As she passed under him, she drove her knife into the soft joint between his breastplate and ribs. This time, he screamed. He staggered, blood pouring from the wound, all balance lost. He stumbled sideways and dropped to one knee, panting, sweat and rage mixing on his scaled brow. She stepped away, giving him room to recover, not out of mercy, but because the spectacle demanded it. She wanted everyone watching to understand that she was in control. The observers on the Senate balcony leaned forward. The recording drones hovered lower now, focusing tight on Zarnak's trembling form. Delegates from neutral systems whispered to one another, reassessing everything they believed about human capability. The Zorkai nobles stood in stiff silence, their pride curdling into anxiety. Elise could have finished it there, but she didn't. She waited for him to rise. Zarnak stood slowly, fury radiating from every wound. "You humiliate me before my kin. You shame our rights. You think this will save your people?" "No," she said, "but it'll stop you from trying this again." He threw his head back and charged with a final, reckless scream. His blades came down like axes. She ducked, pivoted, and spun. Her elbow struck the side of his knee, collapsing it inward. He dropped hard, and in the same movement, she drove her blade into the sand beside his neck, the steel cold against his throat. Silence. The only sound was Zarnak's ragged breathing. His arms twitched. His tail was still. Elise leaned down beside him. Her voice was low but clear. "It's over." He clenched his jaw. "You wouldn't kill me." She twisted the blade a fraction of an inch, just enough to draw blood from the side of his neck. His breath caught. "I don't need to," she said. "Everyone's watching." And indeed, everyone was. Above them, the High Chancellor stood. The ceremonial gavel slammed against the marble. "The duel is concluded. The Zorkai Warlord has been incapacitated. Human cadet Elise Wren is victorious." A hush fell over the chamber. Elise pulled her blade free and rose. She turned from Zarnak without another glance. The arena floor, now smeared with blood and dust, echoed with the sound of her calm footsteps. She walked toward the gate as it opened to receive her, the lights above dimming in rhythm with her departure. There was no cheering, no applause, just awe, just silence. And silence, in this place, was louder than any roar. Elise stood still, her back to the crumpled form behind her. The roar of the crowd never came. No celebration, no chants. The silence held, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, unsure how to react to what it had just witnessed. The cameras floated motionless in the air, their lenses trained on her, processing and transmitting her every breath to trillions of watching eyes across hundreds of star systems. Zarnak remained where he had fallen, his massive body sprawled on the blood-smeared sand, arms twitching slightly, pride bleeding out faster than the purple fluid from the gash near his throat. The arena lights above him dimmed incrementally, as if ashamed to illuminate his defeat. His breath was uneven, ragged, and for the first time in his life, it was accompanied by the sting of humiliation. Elise didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew he wasn't going to rise again, not in defiance, not in anger, not even in pride. She walked slowly toward the edge of the dueling circle, where the gates were still sealed. Her boots left shallow imprints in the sand as she moved, calm, composed, and without haste. The marshal near the gate remained frozen, unsure if he should open it yet. Protocol dictated that the duel must be formally closed by submission or the declaration of death. Behind her, a deep, choked voice echoed off the arena walls. "Stop." Elise halted but didn't turn. "Stop," Zarnak said again, more desperate this time. "I yield." The words were foreign to him. He had never spoken them before, not in training, not in mock trials, and certainly not in the eyes of the public. But there they were, hanging in the air, undeniable and irreversible. His voice cracked with the weight of them. Elise turned her head slightly, just enough for her gaze to reach him over her shoulder. "Say it properly." Zarnak coughed, blood mixing with dust at the corner of his mouth. He raised one trembling hand off the ground, palm upward, a Zorkai gesture of surrender known among the warrior caste. "I yield to the Terran." The audience gasped as one. Even the Senate chamber above buzzed with a ripple of disbelief. Among the Zorkai elite, surrender in ritual combat was considered a fate worse than death, but Zarnak had done it, publicly, with witnesses, on record. He had broken his people's most sacred code in exchange for survival. The gate behind Elise hissed and slid open. The marshal, his face unreadable, nodded in her direction. She said nothing, didn't acknowledge anyone, and walked past him without hesitation. As she exited the arena, the silence followed her like a cloak, as if the air itself dared not disrupt her presence. In the corridor beyond the gates, Commander Soren waited with arms crossed. His eyes scanned her, checking for wounds, but saw nothing serious, just dust, sweat, and a long, dark smear of someone else's blood across her sleeve. "He yielded," he said, still not quite believing it. She nodded once. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked, lowering his voice. "You didn't just win. You forced the most feared warlord in the quadrant to beg for mercy in front of his people." Elise leaned her back against the cold steel wall, finally allowing her shoulders to relax. It was never about the fight. He stepped closer. Number it was about dominance, and you just shattered his. A medical drone floated toward her, scanning her vitals. She waved it off. "I'm fine." Soren looked at her for a long moment. "The council is going to spin this in every direction. Some will say you violated interspecies tradition. Others will say you saved the balance of power. You're going to be a symbol whether you like it or not." She let out a quiet breath. "Let them say what they want." He gave her a sharp look. "And you? What do you want?" She didn't answer, not immediately. Beyond the corridor, the arena lights began to shut down. The spectators were filing out in a stunned daze. No one shouted. No one cheered. Elise had upended more than one warrior. She had ruptured an entire cultural structure. "I want the next human who walks into this building to be treated like a predator," she said softly. "Not prey." Soren nodded. "You just made that happen." Minutes later, Elise was escorted to a private chamber overlooking the city dome, where the Senate Chancellor, Valari Prime, awaited her, the crystalline being pulsed with a low hum of resonance, the alien equivalent of contemplation. "You have altered diplomatic trajectories," the Chancellor said. "The Zorkai were prepared to deploy a second fleet. Now they request a private audience and a non-aggression pact." Elise stood quietly, staring out through the transparent wall at the sprawling lights of Varel Prime below. "He would have killed me," she said, voice low but firm. "Yes," the Chancellor replied. "He intended to. You have fundamentally changed the meaning of this assembly." She turned from the window to face him. "Then make sure he remembers it every time he sits in this room." A few hours later, Zarnak limped into the same chamber, escorted by his own aides, bruised and bandaged but upright. His eyes found Elise immediately. He stood still for a beat, then lowered his gaze. It wasn't shame, more like a quiet, reluctant respect, one warrior acknowledging another. "I offer truce," he said, his voice rough. "You offer survival," Elise corrected. He almost smiled, but his pride stopped him halfway. "You have Earth's fire in you." She stepped forward. Earth has many fires. I'm just the first one you touched. Valari Prime floated between them. This meeting is now officially transcribed. The duel has concluded with surrender. The Zorkai Empire proposes cessation of hostilities and the recognition of human military parity. Elise looked to Zarnak. Parity is only real if you stop underestimating us. I won't make that mistake again. She nodded once. That was all she needed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the artificial horizon of Varel Prime, Elise sat alone in her quarters. The blade she had used rested across her knees, polished clean. The frayed wristband from Gaia 9 still clung to her wrist like a scar that refused to fade. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't even feel triumphant. She felt something colder, satisfaction, because now, across the stars, the name Elise Wren meant something more than a cadet in a uniform. It meant warning, and that was enough. The morning after the duel, Elise woke to a knock on her chamber door, soft, deliberate, but insistent. She was already up, fully dressed, sitting on the floor with her back to the wall and her blade laid carefully in front of her. She hadn't slept much. She hadn't needed to. Her body had adjusted long ago to surviving on little rest, especially in moments when everything around her was shifting too quickly to trust silence. She rose and opened the door without speaking. Lieutenant Rourke stood on the other side, holding a secured datapad in one hand and a thermal flask in the other. "Coffee," he said, offering the flask. She took it. "Is it actually coffee, or one of those station replicator abominations?" "It's the real thing," he said. "I pulled rank and threatened a diplomatic incident." She gave a faint smirk and sipped. It was bitter, earthy, and perfect. Rourke stepped inside and handed her the datapad. "The galaxy's been busy overnight." She skimmed the headlines flashing across the pad's interface. Dozens of planetary news outlets, diplomatic broadcasts, and military channels were covering the same event. Human cadet defeats Zorkai Warlord in ritual duel. Subtitles varied depending on political alignment. Humiliation on Varel Prime. New balance in the Senate. Earth's quiet weapon. Elise Wren, the knife behind the smile. Some praised her, some questioned her. A few even doubted the authenticity of what they had seen, insisting there had to have been trickery involved, but all agreed on one thing: nothing was the same. She handed the pad back. "Let them argue. It means they're still processing. Half the council has already drafted proposals to redefine the Terran status in the core coalition," he said. "The Zorkai have recalled 3 fleets from the Outer Reach, and Zarnak? He submitted formal recognition of Earth's military parity and, get this, a request for bilateral combat exchange." She stared at him. "He wants to train with humans?" Rourke shrugged. "He wants to understand what broke him. You, United States. Take your pick." Elise crossed her arms. "He doesn't want training. He wants to dissect what happened." "Probably," he agreed. "But it doesn't matter. He submitted it in writing, and that gives Earth leverage." She paced the room once before stopping by the window. Outside, the sun of Varel Prime cast a soft orange glow over the dome's high towers and green administrative terraces. Ships moved silently through the air lanes beyond the protective atmosphere, sleek and gleaming under the artificial sky. But even the tranquil view couldn't settle the unrest in her mind. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "You mean to you?" he said. She nodded. "That depends on whether you want to be a soldier, a symbol, or a diplomat." She looked over her shoulder at him. "I was never any of those. I was just a placeholder." "Not anymore," he said. "You're the story, the precedent, the moment people point to and say, that's when it all changed. You'll be summoned for interviews, invited to speak, paraded through Terran networks like a trophy. You'll be offered promotions and probably sent to the next peace summit with a dozen admirals behind you." She turned back toward the window. "Sounds like a prison in gold plating." He hesitated, then asked, "What do you want?" "I want silence," she said, "and I want it somewhere no one's watching me breathe." There was a long pause between them. "You won't get that for a while," he said, "but maybe you can choose where you deal with the noise." Hours later, she entered the Senate once more, this time through the main entrance. The chamber rose around her like a coliseum, each seat filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Holograms floated above the center dais, displaying real-time feeds of delegates speaking across other systems. Valari Prime hovered beside the podium. As Elise approached, a wave of visual distortion rippled through the space, quieting the voices. She stood alone in the circle, once again under the eyes of the galaxy, but not as a combatant, this time as something more ambiguous. "Cadet Elise Wren of the Terran Alliance," the Chancellor said. "The floor recognizes your victory in sanctioned duel and acknowledges the unprecedented shift your actions have initiated." She remained silent. The Chancellor continued, "Do you wish to offer a statement to the coalition?" She didn't speak for a moment. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and raised her head. "I don't come here to boast. What happened in the arena wasn't about pride. It wasn't about dominance. It was survival, pure and simple. That's what humans are built for. Not conquest, not blood, but enduring what others think is impossible and doing it again the next day." A few murmurs stirred through the gallery. She continued, "People say I humiliated Warlord Zarnak. I didn't. I answered a challenge that he issued in full confidence of victory. I met him on his terms and won. That's not humiliation. That's reality." She looked directly at the Zorkai delegation. The senior advisor met her gaze, stiff but unflinching. "I didn't win because I'm exceptional. I won because my world taught me what survival costs. Earth raised me on the edge of collapse, and in that place, I learned not to wait for mercy." Her voice dropped slightly. "I'm not your hero. I'm your mirror." Then she stepped back and let the silence return. The Chancellor's light pulsed, signaling acknowledgement. "The Council thanks you. Your words will be recorded into permanent archive." Later that night, as the city lights flickered and the station settled into artificial dusk, Elise stood at the edge of the landing platform, overlooking the diplomatic docks. She held her travel pack in one hand and her blade, still unpolished from the duel, in the other. The noise was already swelling again. Offers, requests, promotions, threats. But she wasn't staying. Commander Soren approached, his expression softer than usual. "You're really leaving?" She nodded. "The attention makes it impossible to think. You'll be tracked the moment you leave this station." "Let them," she said. "I'll disappear when I want to." He smiled faintly. "You know, for someone who's not a soldier, you've done more for Terran military reputation than the last 3 admirals combined." She gave a dry laugh. "I never did it for them." The shuttle engines powered on, humming low and steady. She stepped aboard without ceremony. As the doors hissed shut, Soren raised a hand in farewell. She didn't wave back. She just nodded, once, and the ship lifted off into the dark. Long after she vanished into the black, whispers of her lingered behind. Stories mutated. Some said she moved faster than the eye could follow. Others claimed she didn't bleed when cut. A few believed she was part of an ancient human sleeper program, bred in silence and unleashed at the tipping point of war. But the truth was quieter than all of them. She was just a girl with a blade, a past no one saw coming, and a reason no one bothered to ask about. And across the stars, warlords flinched at the sound of a human's footfall.